What if Esther, the quiet, orphaned girl living in exile, wasn't just chosen for royalty, but for something far greater? What if the moment she stepped into the palace was not the beginning of luxury, but the start of a divine assignment that would shake kingdoms? Her story isn't just about a crown, it's about a secret you were never told. There's a reason her name still echoes through generations. Behind the royal gates, decisions were made in silence. Battles were fought without swords. And what happened in that hidden moment changed far more than we've been taught. But one detail, subtle, almost forgotten, holds the key to understanding why Esther's story still matters right now. If something in your spirit is stirring even slightly, drop a 777 in the comments. That number may be your personal confirmation that you, too, were born for such a time as this. And to every soul who's supported our work through super thanks, thank you deeply. Your faith keeps this mission alive. So, what did Esther truly carry beneath the silence? The crown and the royal robes? The answer may surprise you or even convict you. Let's begin. The astonishing truth about Queen Esther and how she saved her people. The story of Esther unfolds like a hidden scroll in the vast corridors of the Persian Empire. During the reign of King Xerxes, also known to history as Ahasuerus, and it begins not with splendor, but with sorrow. Esther, whose Hebrew name was Hadassah, lived as a Jewish exile in a foreign land. Her childhood was marked by loss, for both her father and mother were taken from her at an early age. Yet her story did not end in despair, because her cousin Mordecai stepped in as her guardian and mentor. He became the one who guided her steps, offering wisdom and faith like a lamp in the darkness. Could it be that the greatest stories of destiny are born not in privilege, but in places of deep loss and hidden preparation? Life for the Jewish people in exile was far from easy. They moved through a culture that often sought to erase their own, speaking words that were not theirs, living under laws designed by strangers. And yet, within this tension, Esther was being refined. Mordecai's influence shaped her character with quiet strength and steady faith. His counsel was like an anchor in stormy waters, preparing her heart for something far greater than she could see. As the book of Proverbs declares, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Proverbs 22:6. Isn't it striking that the unseen lessons of youth often echo the loudest when the hour of testing finally arrives? Meanwhile, within the glittering palace walls, another drama was unfolding. Queen Vashti, once admired for her beauty and presence, refused the king's command to appear before him at a royal banquet. This act of defiance shook the empire's order. Xerxes, humiliated before his nobles, removed her from her throne. Suddenly, Persia's crown stood without a queen. A decree was sent forth from all 127 provinces of the empire, stretching from India to Kush. The most beautiful young women were to be gathered for the royal harem. The scale of this search was unimaginable, a movement across an empire that touched nations and languages. Out of this sweeping decree, one name was quietly being prepared by Providence: Esther. Though she came from humble beginnings, her presence was impossible to overlook. Esther's beauty was radiant, but it was her humility and grace that made her unforgettable. Higai, the eunuch who oversaw the women, quickly noticed the difference in her. While others clamored for attention, Esther carried herself with a serenity that seemed almost otherworldly. She was given the finest oils, perfumes, and treatments. But even these could not outshine the rare dignity already woven into her character. Isn't it true that the rarest kind of beauty is the one that remains even when the ornaments are removed? Mordecai's counsel continued to guide her. He instructed Esther to conceal her Jewish identity, and she obeyed without question. What looked like a small decision at the time would later become the hinge on which history would turn. How many times in our own lives do we dismiss small choices, not realizing they could one day alter the course of everything? Then came the moment that would shift the story forever. Esther was brought before King Xerxes himself. Imagine the scene: golden pillars towering above, incense drifting through the air, the weight of empire pressing upon the hall. Yet amidst all the splendor, the king's gaze was drawn to Esther. Something in her presence silenced the room. He was captivated, not only by her beauty, but by the quiet wisdom that shone in her eyes. In an instant, he placed the royal crown upon her head, and the orphaned exile became Queen of Persia. Esther's sudden rise to power might appear, on the surface, like a tale of fortune and beauty. An orphan girl crowned queen in the world's largest empire. Who could script such a story? Yet the truth runs deeper than appearances. Hidden beneath the grandeur of the crown was a divine thread, quietly weaving every detail together. For Esther was not alone in the palace. Mordecai, her steadfast cousin, remained a faithful presence in the shadows. Though separated from her in station, he stayed close, lingering by the palace gates day after day, vigilant in both love and duty. Can you picture him there, an older man of exile, watching silently at the walls of Persia's splendor, determined that Esther would never stand unguarded in the labyrinth of royal power? It was during these quiet vigils that destiny revealed itself. Mordecai, attentive and unshaken, uncovered whispers of treachery. Two of the king's officials, entrusted with guarding the very thresholds of Xerxes' life, plotted against him in secret. Their scheme was ruthless: to assassinate the ruler of Persia. Mordecai, hearing of it, wasted no time. He passed the warning to Esther, and she, with wisdom and urgency, reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The plot unraveled. The conspirators were seized, interrogated, and swiftly executed. In the chronicles of the empire, Mordecai's loyalty was inscribed for remembrance. Yet strikingly, no reward was given to him in that moment. Why would such an act of loyalty, one that saved a king's life, go unrewarded? Was it not because a greater timing, a more perfect hour, was waiting to unfold? This hidden record of Mordecai's faithfulness was more than history. It was prophecy in motion. What seemed like a small act at the gates would later become the very key to unlocking deliverance for an entire people. Is this not how God often works quietly, almost invisibly, arranging events that seem insignificant until the appointed hour arrives? For we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Esther's place in the palace was not an accident of fate, nor the mere outcome of beauty contests and royal decrees. It was divine positioning. She may not have understood it then, how could she? But her crown was never meant to be an ornament of luxury. It was a calling, one that would soon test her in ways she could never have imagined. Her courage, her faith, her very life would be summoned to the front lines of history. At this stage of her journey, the purpose of her reign remained hidden in mystery. But the whispers of destiny grew louder. Could it be that her story was never about personal glory, but about the survival of an entire people? Esther's journey from a nameless exile to the throne of Persia was no coincidence. It was a divine setup, a stage prepared for a trial that would decide the fate of nations. While Esther adjusted to the splendor and weight of her new life as queen, another story, darker, venomous, and unseen by many, was slowly tightening its grip within the Persian court. At the center of this storm was Haman, the king's most trusted official, a man who rose through the ranks with ambition that burned hotter than wisdom. His position gave him authority, but his heart was filled with arrogance. Pride was the cloak he wore, and it blinded him to reason. To those around him, he was feared. To the king, he was trusted. But to Mordecai, Haman was simply another man who demanded the kind of honor that belonged to God alone. Day after day, Haman's servants, courtiers, and citizens bowed low before him, feeding his inflated sense of worth. Yet Mordecai, the Jew who sat at the palace gate, would not bend. His defiance was not rebellion but devotion. For the law of Israel declared, "You shall have no other gods before me." Exodus 20:3. For Mordecai, bowing to Haman would have been an act of worship he could never give. And here the clash began, not between two men only, but between pride and principle, arrogance and faith. Haman's fury soon outgrew its initial wound. What started as anger toward Mordecai swelled into hatred for an entire people. To Haman, Mordecai's faith was not just personal conviction, it was an insult that must be crushed. And if one man resisted him, then every Jew in the empire must suffer. How often does unchecked pride become the soil from which cruelty grows, devising a plan soaked in malice? Haman approached King Xerxes with words laced in deception. He painted the Jews as rebels, dangerous and divisive, claiming they followed their own laws and ignored the king's authority. He spoke as if their very existence threatened the empire's stability. And Xerxes, seeing only his trusted advisor's polished confidence, failed to question the truth. Without hesitation, the king gave Haman the authority of the royal signet ring, the very power to seal the fate of nations. Isn't it sobering how quickly trust, when misplaced, can open the door to disaster? With a stroke of wax and ring, the decree was born. On the 13th day of the 12th month, every Jew in the empire was to be destroyed: men, women, entire households. What the king did not know was the chilling irony that his own queen belonged to the people now marked for annihilation. Could he have imagined that the royal crown he placed upon Esther's head would one day stand in direct conflict with the seal he entrusted to Haman? The edict spread like fire through dry fields. Messengers rode swiftly from province to province, 127 inches, all proclaiming death. From India to Kush, the news darkened the hearts of the Jewish community. Fear seized their homes. Dread clouded their gatherings, and prayers rose in desperation. What could a scattered, exiled people do in the face of such a decree? And yet, hidden within the palace, Esther, the queen no one suspected was Jewish, was about to be drawn into the center of this crisis. When Mordecai heard the dreadful decree, it struck him like a blade to the soul. The man who had once walked with steady resolve at the palace gates now staggered under the weight of grief. He tore his garments, the fabric of dignity ripped away, and clothed himself in sackcloth and ashes, the ancient language of anguish. In the streets of Susa, the capital of the empire, He wept openly. His mourning was not silent, nor hidden, for the pain of his people demanded to be seen. Could the city ignore such a cry when despair walked boldly through its gates? News of Mordecai's lament soon reached the palace. Behind walls of luxury, Esther's attendants rushed to tell her that her guardian, the man who had raised her from childhood, now sat, clothed in sorrow, at the king's gate. Alarmed, she sent a messenger to discover the cause. Through that messenger, the truth broke through the silken curtains of the palace. Her people were condemned, their destruction sealed by the king's own ring. Mordecai explained everything, pressing into Esther the urgency of the hour. He pleaded with her to go before the king, not as queen merely, but as intercessor for her people. Yet this request was not simple. Esther's heart must have trembled, for though she wore the crown of Persia, she was not shielded from its laws. To enter the throne room uninvited was to invite death itself. Unless the king extended his golden scepter in mercy, and Esther knew well, 30 long days had passed since Xerxes had called for her. Was she still in his favor? Did her crown truly grant her security? Or was she as vulnerable as the humblest subject in the empire? Beneath her royal robes lay another secret, her true identity as a Jew. She had kept it hidden, obeying Mordecai's counsel. To reveal it now would not only risk her life, but expose her to the same peril threatening her people. Would the king embrace her as queen, or turn against her as one of the condemned? Then came Mordecai's reply, a message that cut through fear and reached the core of Esther's soul. He sent word, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Esther 4:13-14. These words fell like thunder in Esther's heart. This was no accident, nor coincidence. She had not been crowned merely to enjoy feasts and jewels. She had been positioned, divinely placed, for this exact moment in history. The fate of her people now rested upon her willingness to step into the fire. Could it be that every sorrow of her childhood, every hidden decision, every act of obedience had been leading to this single crossroad? Esther now stood at the threshold of her greatest trial. The choice before her was like a blade on both sides. If she approached the king uninvited, the law declared she could be executed on the spot unless Xerxes extended his golden scepter. Yet, if she remained silent, if fear sealed her lips, then her people would be swept away in annihilation. The weight of two worlds rested on her shoulders, the life of a queen and the destiny of an entire nation. But instead of collapsing under the crushing burden, Esther rose with remarkable resolve. She sent word back to Mordecai, her heart steady yet trembling with the gravity of what she must do. "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Esther 4:16. These words were not a cry of despair, but a declaration of surrender to divine will. What kind of faith must it take to face death? Not with certainty of rescue, but with trust in the unseen hand of God. For 3 days and nights, the Jewish community of Susa laid aside every necessity of survival. No food touched their lips. No water eased their thirst. Their bodies weakened, but their prayers rose like fire, burning steadily before heaven's throne. Esther herself, clothed outwardly in the garments of royalty, stripped herself inwardly of all earthly strength. Along with her maidservants, she embraced the same desperate fast, uniting her fate with her people in absolute dependence upon God. Her resolve was not the boldness of arrogance, but the humility of faith. She knew that crowns could not save, laws could not protect, and beauty could not deliver. Without divine intervention, her efforts would crumble into nothing, and yet she chose to believe. How many of us, faced with impossible choices, would dare to walk forward with the words, "If I perish, I perish," etched into our hearts? Esther's courage is rightly celebrated, but often overlooked is the immense pressure she bore as a young woman in a court that gave her little real power. She was no ruler in her own right, no warrior armed for battle, yet she carried a faith greater than armies. Her decision was not simply an act of bravery, but a living testimony of trust in God's plan. Trust that even if she stepped into death, His purpose would not fail. At that moment, the Queen of Persia was no longer just Esther. She became the vessel of a nation's hope. On the third day of the fast, Esther rose from her place of prayer and fasting, her body weak, but her spirit steadied by faith. She clothed herself in her royal robes, garments of splendor meant to reflect power. Yet beneath them, her heart surely pounded with fear. Step by step, she moved toward the inner court of the king's palace, each echo of her footsteps carrying the weight of her people's destiny. There she stood, framed against the grandeur of the palace gates, waiting in silence, her life hanging upon the movement of a single hand. Could one gesture truly decide whether she would live or die? The king, seated upon his throne, looked up and saw Esther standing in the court. The air must have thickened with tension in that moment, for to enter unbidden was to invite death. Yet to Esther's relief, and perhaps to the astonishment of the courtiers present, Xerxes lifted his golden scepter toward her. The symbol of mercy was extended. Life, not death, had spoken, with grace and composure. Though her nerves must have trembled within, Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The gates of doom had opened into a window of possibility. Xerxes, reading the concern written upon her face, leaned forward and asked what troubled her. With lavish generosity, he promised her anything she desired, even up to half of his kingdom. Here was her chance, the moment when she could pour out the plight of her people. Yet Esther, with wisdom deeper than fear, did not rush. Instead, she bowed and extended a respectful invitation. She had prepared a banquet and requested the honor of the king's presence, asking also that Haman attend. This was not hesitation, it was strategy, a patient weaving of timing. She knew that some requests demand not only courage, but also perfect alignment. That night, in the glow of candles and wine, the banquet unfolded. Yet once again, Esther held her words close. Choosing silence over haste, she invited the king and Haman to return the following day for another feast. Was it delay, or was it divine orchestration? For in that pause, heaven moved unseen. That very night, as the empire lay in slumber, the king found himself restless. Sleep fled from him, and he called for the royal chronicles to be read aloud. As the scrolls unfolded, a forgotten record emerged, the account of Mordecai uncovering the assassination plot that once threatened the king's life. How strange that in the very hours Esther delayed her request. The memory of Mordecai's loyalty was stirred. Could timing such as this truly be mere coincidence? Or was it the invisible hand of God aligning the pieces of destiny? Haman, the sworn enemy of Esther's people, was at the height of his pride. With the king's signet ring in his grasp and Xerxes' trust seemingly unshakable, he believed himself untouchable. His plot to eradicate the Jews stretched across 127 provinces like a shadow of death, and in his arrogance he savored the thought of Mordecai's ruin. The man who refused to bow had become an obsession, a thorn in his pride that he could not ignore. How often does unchecked hatred blind even the wisest of men until they build their own destruction with their own hands? So blinded was Haman that he ordered the construction of an enormous gallows, towering 75 feet high, a grotesque monument to his rage. It was built not simply to execute Mordecai, but to make a spectacle of him, a warning to all who would dare defy Haman's pride. In his mind, Mordecai's humiliation was certain, his end already sealed. But as Scripture reminds us, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. Even as the gallows rose toward the sky, the foundations of Haman's downfall were already being laid. The next morning, filled with eagerness to deliver his request for Mordecai's execution, Haman entered the court of the king. Yet, before he could utter a word, Xerxes spoke first, an interruption designed not by accident, but by providence. The king, recalling the chronicles read to him in his sleepless night, asked a question that would change everything. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman's heart must have swelled with pride. Who else could the king possibly mean but himself? In his vanity, he envisioned robes draped upon his shoulders, the king's own horse beneath him, and crowds shouting his glory through the streets. With this fantasy alive in his imagination, Haman suggested aloud the very display he longed for. The honored man should be dressed in royal garments, placed upon the king's horse, and led through the city, while a noble official proclaimed, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. He's of the contract, it was of the cone of the stand." But then came the crushing blow. King Xerxes turned to him and commanded, "Go at once, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." Esther 6:10. The words must have struck like thunder in Haman's ears. Could it be? Mordecai, the man he loathed above all, was to receive the very honor Haman had imagined for himself. Humiliation replaced arrogance in an instant. Haman, who dreamed of seeing Mordecai hanging lifeless on the gallows, now found himself leading his enemy through the streets of Susa. With trembling lips, he was forced to cry out the praises he had intended for himself. This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. The people of the city looked on in astonishment. Haman, the mighty official, parading Mordecai in honor. This reversal was no coincidence. It was the first great crack in Haman's fortress of pride. The very mouth that plotted Mordecai's destruction was compelled to proclaim his greatness. Was this not a sign that God himself was at work, overturning the schemes of the wicked? Yet, what Haman did not know was that this humiliation was only the beginning. That evening, the palace shimmered with an unusual weight of anticipation. Queen Esther had prepared a second banquet, more intimate and deliberate than the first. At the table sat only three: King Xerxes, Queen Esther, and Haman the king in his power. the queen in her hidden resolve, and the enemy of her people, unaware that the noose of judgment was tightening around his neck. The air must have been heavy with unspoken tension, as if the walls themselves leaned in to hear what would finally be revealed. As the goblets glistened with wine and the meal was served, Xerxes once again pressed Esther with the same question: "What is your petition?" "Queen Esther, it shall be granted you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom. It will be given you." Esther 7-2. At that moment, Esther could no longer remain silent. With trembling courage that had been forged through fasting and prayer, she lifted her voice and revealed the truth. She was a Jew, and her people, her own life included, were marked for destruction. With clarity and boldness, she exposed Haman as the mastermind behind the plot. The revelation struck like lightning. Xerxes, stunned and enraged, rose from his couch in fury and stormed out into the palace gardens to steady his thoughts. Imagine the scene: the most powerful man in the world, pacing in the night, realizing that the queen he cherished was condemned under a decree signed with his own ring. Could betrayal cut deeper than this, that the man he trusted most, Haman, had dared to endanger even the life of his queen? Meanwhile, Haman's mask of arrogance shattered into panic. For the first time, he saw the truth. His power was crumbling, his life slipping through his fingers. Desperate, he threw himself at Esther, begging for mercy. The irony was sharp. Haman, who demanded others bow before him, now fell prostrate at the feet of the queen he sought to destroy. Was this not divine justice unfolding before human eyes? But Providence turned his desperation into condemnation. Xerxes re-entered the hall and found Haman collapsed upon Esther's couch. To the king's eyes, the image was unmistakable. It looked as though Haman was assaulting the queen. The fury that had already burned within him now erupted like a consuming fire. His voice thundered through the chamber, and at once the royal guards seized Haman. Then came the final stroke of divine irony. Harbona, one of the king's attendants, spoke up. A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. Esther 7-9. Xerxes needed no further words. "Hang him on it," he commanded. And so it was. Haman was executed upon the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The trap he had prepared for another became the instrument of his own ruin. The lesson echoes through eternity. Pride always digs its own pit. Haman, who had plotted the annihilation of God's people, became the first victim of his own scheme. His downfall was not coincidence, nor mere twist of fate. It was the unseen hand of God, orchestrating every moment. From the king's sleepless night to Esther's divine patience, from Mordecai's loyalty to Haman's arrogance, every thread was woven together until justice was revealed. And so the banquet of fear became the banquet of reversal. Haman's pride was silenced. Esther's courage was vindicated. And the God who hides his face in history proved once more that he governs every moment. Could any human power truly stand against the will of heaven? Although Haman had died on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai, the shadow of his plot had not yet lifted. The decree to annihilate the Jews still stood written into the law of Persia, sealed with the king's signet ring. And in the unchanging structure of Persian rule, what was once decreed could not simply be erased. It was as if the very empire itself held its breath, knowing that Haman's death was only the beginning, not the end. The lives of the Jewish people still hung precariously in the balance. Once more, Esther clothed herself in courage and stepped before King Xerxes. This time, her plea went beyond personal safety. With a trembling voice yet unyielding heart, she begged for her people, asking the king to find a way to deliver them from the edict of death that still loomed. Imagine the weight of that moment, Esther, who had risked her life once, now risking it again, pressing deeper into the storm. Could a woman's courage truly turn the tide of an empire? Xerxes, stirred by both her bravery and his affection for her, looked upon Esther with favor. He could not revoke the law that was sealed, but he granted permission for another to be written. Mordecai, now elevated to Haman's former position of power and authority, was entrusted with this task. The same man who once sat at the king's gate in sackcloth and ashes was now clothed in royal garments, holding the king's authority in his hand. Was this not the perfect reversal, God lifting the humble and casting down the proud? Without hesitation, Mordecai issued a new decree. On the very day the Jews were scheduled to be massacred, they were given the legal right to rise and defend themselves. The message went out swiftly, carried on horses bred from the royal stables, racing across 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. Everywhere it traveled, the words brought hope to trembling hearts. The Jews were no longer defenseless. They had been granted authority to resist, to fight back, and to prevail. What a transformation it must have been. In towns and villages, in marketplaces and homes, those who had once wept in dread now lifted their heads in determination. The decree that was meant to seal their destruction had been overturned by a higher decree of justice. Does this not remind us that heaven can turn even the darkest sentence into a doorway of deliverance? When the fateful day arrived, the empire braced for bloodshed. But instead of Jews falling before their enemies, the opposite unfolded. Empowered by the law, they rose to defend themselves. Across the empire, the tables turned. Those who sought to harm them fell instead, and the Jews triumphed decisively over their adversaries. Fear and dread gave way to strength and victory. What had been marked in the calendar as a day of destruction became a day of salvation. The mourning turned to dancing, the ashes to garments of joy. This reversal was not simply a political turn of fortune, it was divine orchestration. The God who had seemed hidden in the shadows revealed himself in the outcome, proving that he governs the course of nations and defends his covenant people. To commemorate this astonishing reversal, the festival of Purim was established, a celebration born from ashes, a feast carved out of what was once meant to be destruction. The very name Purim, meaning lots, recalls the moment when Haman had cast lots to determine the date of the Jews' annihilation. What irony that the day chosen for mourning became, instead, a day of rejoicing. On Purim, sorrow was transformed into laughter, terror into triumph, and silence into songs of deliverance. From that time forward, the Jewish people were commanded to mark the day with feasting, joy, and the giving of gifts both to one another and to the poor, ensuring that no household, no matter how small, would be left outside the circle of celebration. Can you imagine the first Purim, the sound of children's laughter in the streets, tables filled with food where there had once been fasting, the poor receiving gifts with tears of relief, and to this very day, Purim is observed by Jews around the world. Each year, it stands as a living testimony, reminding generation after generation of God's faithfulness and the courage of Queen Esther. Yet the legacy of Esther cannot be confined to a single feast. It is more than tradition, more than ritual. It is the story of divine providence, weaving through ordinary lives, raising up deliverance when all seemed lost. How remarkable that God worked not through armies or prophets with fiery words, but through the quiet strength of a young woman hidden in the palace and a faithful cousin watching from the gates. Esther's willingness to risk her life was not a rash impulse, but a decision sharpened by prayer, fasting, and wisdom. She discerned her moment with perfect timing, revealing her request not in haste, but at the exact instant when God had prepared the king's heart. Her strategy was as vital as her bravery. For courage without wisdom can falter, but courage guided by faith can reshape history. What many overlook is that Esther was not simply a beautiful queen, she was a leader whose resolve carried the weight of her people's survival. Could it be that her story reminds us that true beauty is revealed not in outward splendor, but in the sacrifice of standing for others at the risk of oneself? And what of Mordecai? The man once clothed in sackcloth and ashes rose to prominence after these events, lifted to a position second only to King Xerxes himself. His loyalty to the throne, coupled with his devotion to his people, brought stability and security across the empire. For the Jews, it was a time of rest from enemies and a season of peace under his leadership. This, too, was part of the reversal. Where once he had been the target of scorn and death, now he stood as a symbol of justice and honor. The story of Esther is more than an ancient tale. It is a living reminder that even when the night seems impenetrably dark, God is still moving in the unseen places. What looks like silence from heaven is often the sound of threads being woven in secret, a tapestry of providence preparing to be revealed at the appointed time. Though his name is never mentioned directly in the book of Esther, his fingerprints are everywhere, guiding events, positioning people, and overturning the schemes of the wicked. Isn't that the same truth we often overlook in our own lives? When we cannot see his hand, but later discover that he was directing our steps all along, God raises up individuals in the right moment, planting them in positions they may never have imagined, to accomplish purposes far greater than themselves. Esther's life is a testimony to this reality. She was not merely a queen crowned for luxury, she was a vessel chosen for courage, her faith to fast, her wisdom to wait, and her boldness to speak at the exact moment were the instruments through which an entire nation was preserved. Mordecai's rise, too, shows that God delights to lift the lowly and clothe them in honor. The legacy of Esther whispers hope into every generation. No circumstance is too desperate, no decree too final, no night too long for God to reverse. Her story testifies to the eternal truth that faith, courage, and divine timing can rewrite what seems irreversible. And so it speaks to us even now when you stand surrounded by shadows, when the weight of fear presses in. Remember that the God of Esther is still the God of today. He can turn mourning into joy, ashes into crowns, and certain defeat into decisive victory. The story of Esther closes like a timeless echo, reminding us that God is never absent, even when his name seems hidden in the shadows. Her courage teaches us that one act of faith at the right moment can change the destiny of many. What strikes me most deeply is that Esther was not extraordinary by birth. She was an orphan, living in exile, carrying scars of loss. Yet God raised her up, gave her a crown, and positioned her for such a time as this. And isn't that true for us as well? Each of us, in our own lives. faces moments when silence feels safer than speaking, when fear tempts us to hide. But Esther's life whispers across the centuries. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to trust God's plan, even when fear is loudest. In a world filled with uncertainty, injustice, and brokenness, her example reminds us that heaven still works through ordinary people, willing to take extraordinary steps. Personally, I believe we are all placed in moments that demand courage, sometimes in our families, sometimes in our workplaces, sometimes in the quiet battles no one else sees. Like Esther, we may not understand the full weight of why we are here, but I am convinced that God's timing is never an accident. Your voice, your faith, your decision to stand firm could be the very spark that changes the course for others. So, chosen ones, let Esther's story inspire us not only to read history, but to live courageously in our own time. If this message stirred something in your heart, I encourage you, don't just keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it so that others may find hope in Esther's legacy. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss future stories that remind us of God's faithfulness. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below about the part of Esther's journey that spoke to you the most. Thank you so much for watching, for your support, and for being part of this journey with me, whether through likes, shares, or even just by being here. You're helping spread stories that carry light into a world that often feels dark. May you walk boldly in your own such a time as this. And may God's favor and protection surround you always.